Here are my top tips for how to talk to someone who's living with dementia. I'm Dr. Nicole Didick, and I'm a geriatrician who's looked after older adults for about 20 years. If you want to learn how to think like a geriatrician, then just keep watching. These are my top tips for how to talk to someone who's living with dementia. The person might be living with dementia related to Alzheimer's or could have another cause. Don't get too hung up on the particular type of dementia. A lot of these principles of communication will work with any type of short-term memory loss or difficulties with language or executive function. Number one is to go into the world of the person who's living with dementia. This is probably the most important tip, but it's not as easy as it sounds. It's important to realize that someone who's living with dementia is probably living very much in the present moment. Things in the past, especially the recent past, might not be very easy to access for the person. So don't try to bring up things from earlier in the day or in the week. Stay in the moment with the person and go into their world. If their perceptions don't line up with reality as you know it, then that's okay. That's the world that you're going to go into, and you're going to communicate based on that world. Number two, don't argue. This kind of builds on going into the person's world. If somebody says something that you know doesn't line up with reality, so for example, if they're looking for a pet or a partner who's no longer in their lives because they've passed away, don't correct the person. Some people find this ethically difficult to do, but it's absolutely going to make communication easier if instead of trying to reorient the person to reality, you instead try to talk about the loved one who's passed away without framing it as the fact that they're deceased. So if somebody brings up their husband, Ralph, and when are they coming home from work, instead of saying Ralph died 5 years ago, then maybe just talk about what you liked about Ralph. Or if you've never met Ralph, ask some questions about him. What did he like to do when he got home from work? What did he do on the weekends? What was the best trip that you ever took with Ralph? Things like that are going to be more accessible for the person who's living with dementia, and it's kind of going to be a safer and more enjoyable topic rather than going over again that the loved one is deceased. Somebody might have even forgotten that they've passed away, and so they might relive that grief again. So don't try to correct and don't try to argue. Number three is don't try to test the person. So don't ask things like, do you remember meeting me before? Or do you know what day this is? You can imagine if you had short-term memory loss and somebody came at you with that, it would be really disconcerting. You'd think, what, have I forgotten my anniversary again? Or am I supposed to know who that person is? It could provoke a lot of anxiety. Don't play the guessing game. It might just make somebody uncomfortable. Remember, you're trying to set your family member or the person you're caring for with dementia, you're trying to set them up for success, not failure. And putting somebody on the spot to answer a question that they might not be able to is going to be a pitfall. Number four, don't ignore a person's strength. Someone who's living with dementia might have challenges with short-term memory and other parts of cognition and thinking, but there will be areas of strength. A person might have an excellent long-term memory, for example, so they might be able to and might enjoy talking about things that happened in the very distant past for them. They might still have a strong interest in their faith or a favorite hobby, music, or singing, or something else. So playing to those strengths is going to be a very valuable tactic to use when you're communicating with someone who's living with dementia. You don't have to be patronizing, but even just talking to the person about an area that you know they have expertise and interest in is going to help that person to succeed because they have something to share on that topic. So try to stick in those areas and communication will probably go better. And finally, don't communicate with someone who's living with dementia from a place of anger or frustration, if that's possible. Caring for someone who's living with dementia can lead to a lot of tense moments at times, and communicating when you're in that kind of mindset might lead you to say things that could be misperceived or could have a negative outcome on the relationship that you're building or maintaining. If you need to, get someone else to step into the breach for the time that you're feeling stressed. You could even just maybe take a few moments to go and do another activity, take a few deep breaths even, and then come back to the situation. Don't set yourself up to fail. So those are my top 5 tips for how to communicate with someone who's living with dementia. And I think they'll work if you're a family member or if you're a care partner in a professional role and you're communicating with the person who's living with dementia. Remember to avoid confrontation and go into the world of the person with dementia. Don't play guessing games with them and don't set the person up to fail. Don't forget that they have strengths that you can build on in order to communicate better. And finally, don't put yourself in a position where you're not going to be at your best when you are communicating. Thanks for watching, and if you want to learn more about dementia and the aging brain, then subscribe to me here on YouTube or go to my website, thewrinkle.ca. And let me know what your tips are for communicating well.